The chamber was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your shoulders before history decides to make its entrance. Cameras flashed, papers rustled. But then, from the bench, Justice Stephen Breyer leaned forward. His voice steady, deliberate, carrying the authority of a lifetime spent weighing America's most difficult questions. And in that moment, he did something no one expected. He looked directly at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and said, with quiet conviction, "Your brilliance deserves respect." The words hung in the air like a bell struck in a cathedral. Impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some leaned in, startled. Others sat back, stunned into silence. For a nation used to venomous clashes, the spectacle of a Supreme Court justice breaking formality to acknowledge dignity, intelligence, and composure, it was nothing short of seismic. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. Instead, she gave a measured nod, her calm presence magnifying the weight of what had just been said. Her restraint made the moment even sharper, even more unforgettable. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about a compliment. It was about validation. Validation of a woman who has endured attacks, interruptions, dismissals, and the raw heat of political disrespect. In one line, Breyer had flipped the script. He had given voice to what millions watching at home felt but had not heard from the highest echelons of power. That brilliance, when paired with dignity, can pierce through the chaos. America sat up. Social feeds lit up in real time. Viewers replayed the clip, each time marveling at how simple words could carry the force of a gavel slamming down on arrogance. And yet, this moment didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't accidental. It was the product of history, conflict, and character colliding in a single exchange that would echo far beyond the chamber walls. Because if Justice Breyer's respect was the mic drop, then the real story, the battles, the tension, the insults that paved the way, was the build-up. The thunderclap of Justice Breyer's words wasn't just a personal nod to Jasmine Crockett. It was a statement that reached far beyond the walls of that chamber. To understand its power, you need the backdrop. America in 2025 stands at a crossroads. Bitterly divided, locked in culture wars where shouting often drowns out substance, and where truth itself is constantly under siege by noise. Against that backdrop, a single moment of dignity can feel revolutionary. Jasmine Crockett represents something more than her seat in Congress. To her supporters, she embodies resilience, a woman who wears her identity unapologetically and refuses to be minimized in arenas historically dominated by arrogance and condescension. To her critics, she's an easy target, dismissed, interrupted, caricatured in headlines that prefer conflict over clarity. That's the storm she walked into again and again, never backing down but never losing her composure either. And then there was Breyer, a retired Supreme Court justice, steeped in decades of jurisprudence, the image of measured thought. He wasn't expected to take sides, much less to speak out in defense of a rising Congresswoman. His very presence in that hearing symbolized authority, the kind not easily swayed by media spin or partisan talking points. So when he chose to highlight Crockett's brilliance, it wasn't just commentary. It was validation delivered from the mountaintop. This is where the stakes sharpen. Because dignity versus arrogance is no longer just about two individuals. It's about the image of American democracy itself. When leaders are reduced to insults and chaos, people lose faith in the system. When someone like Crockett stands tall, answers with calm, and wins respect in the face of hostility, it offers a glimpse of the democracy people want to believe in again. The clash isn't just Crockett versus her detractors. It's truth versus distortion. It's calm versus chaos. And the nation is watching closely, because moments like this don't just trend for a day. They become symbols. They become shorthand for who we are and what kind of leadership we reward. Cable networks cut into coverage with urgency. Social media clipped every frame, every pause, dissecting the weight of Breyer's words. Commentators debated. Was this a turning point? Did it mark the rise of a new political voice who could reframe what strength looks like? And as the coverage spread, so too did the stakes. For every American tired of seeing dignity drowned out by noise, Crockett became a mirror of hope. For every cynic convinced the system only rewards the loudest and most reckless, her composure was a challenge, a reminder that patience, precision, and truth still matter. But here's the twist. At this point in the story, most critics believed Jasmine Crockett's voice would remain buried under the avalanche of louder, angrier opponents. They assumed she'd be ignored, sidelined, forgotten in the chaos. And just when critics thought she'd be ignored, something extraordinary happened. Every great story has its antagonist. But here it wasn't a single person, a single rival, or even a single institution. It was something more insidious. A system designed to dismiss Jasmine Crockett before she could even speak. The arrogance of opponents, the smirks of commentators, the quick dismissal of colleagues who underestimated her. It all formed a chorus of condescension that seemed destined to drown her out. In the world of politics, especially in hearings where theatrics often overshadow truth, Crockett was cast in a role written by others. She was the outsider, the unpolished freshman, the too bold woman who didn't know when to stay quiet. And time and again, the very people who should have recognized her intelligence chose instead to question her place. Sound bites echoed this pattern. A senator leaning back in his chair, muttering into a hot mic, "She talks too much for someone who hasn't been here long." A cable pundit with a knowing smirk, "Pretty words, but does she really belong in the big leagues?" A rival across the aisle, dripping with sarcasm, "Bless her heart, she thinks she's the smartest one in the room." The arrogance was relentless. Commentators labeled her confidence as attitude. Her refusal to be silenced became grandstanding. When she cut through noise with facts, critics dismissed it as over-prepared notes instead of brilliance. The contradictions were glaring. The very traits praised in others, sharpness, boldness, a willingness to fight, were somehow twisted into flaws when embodied by Crockett. And this wasn't just about one Congresswoman. It was the age-old script that women of color in politics are forced to play against. Too soft and you're invisible. Too strong and you're angry. Too prepared and you're showing off. Too authentic and you're unprofessional. The game was rigged. Every move Crockett made was set up to be mocked, minimized, or dismissed. Even allies sometimes joined in the underestimation. Some whispered advice in hushed tones. "Don't push too hard, Jasmine. Pick your battles." Others offered faint praise that cut more than criticism. "You've got potential if you can just tone it down a bit." It all built up to one expectation, that sooner or later, the weight of this dismissal would crush her. That she would burn out, fade away, or learn to play by the rules of silence. Viewers at home, primed by decades of the same political theater, half expected her to become just another casualty of a system allergic to brilliance that doesn't come in familiar packaging. And the media fed the narrative. Headlines were clipped and sharpened like blades. "Crockett oversteps again." "Rookie representative embarrasses herself in hearing." Pundits chuckled on panels, framing her every appearance as reckless ambition. The message was clear. If Jasmine Crockett was brilliant, it wasn't brilliance that the establishment was willing to see. But beneath the mockery lay fear. Fear that someone like her, armed with truth and dignity, could cut through the noise in ways arrogance never could. Fear that the very composure they mocked would one day outshine the shouting. They laughed at her, yes, but laughter often hides anxiety. And so the stage was set. An arena where arrogance towered like a bully, where dismissive smirks lined every hallway, where the system seemed calibrated to grind her down. The expectation of her downfall wasn't whispered. It was spoken out loud again and again, until it became background noise. "She's too new. She's not ready. She'll learn the hard way." But Jasmine Crockett had heard all of this before. She had carried these doubts like shadows trailing her every step. And if history had taught her anything, it was this. The louder the mockery, the sweeter the silence when truth finally speaks. The critics thought they were writing her ending. They thought her role was already decided. But in reality, they were only setting the stage for something no one saw coming. Because this was not the first time Jasmine Crockett had faced doubters. Before that chamber erupted in respect, before Justice Breyer's words cut through the noise, there was a story that stretched far beyond the marble walls of Washington. It was the story of Jasmine Crockett, a woman forged not in the gilded corridors of power, but in the unglamorous trenches of struggle, community, and relentless determination. She wasn't born into privilege. She wasn't handed a path paved with connections or dynasties. Instead, Jasmine Crockett's journey began like so many in America, with grit, with hope, and with the odds stacked against her. Growing up, she saw firsthand how systems failed those without a voice. She watched neighbors dismissed by bureaucracies, families crushed under inequality, and young people convinced their dreams didn't matter. And in those moments, something inside her hardened, not into bitterness but into resolve. Education became her weapon. While others underestimated her drive, she studied harder, argued sharper, pushed further. Law wasn't just a career choice. It was a shield she could wield for those who had none. In classrooms, she wasn't the loudest, but she was the most relentless. Professors noted her precision, her refusal to back down when logic was on her side. The brilliance they couldn't ignore was the same brilliance others outside those halls would soon try to dismiss. As a lawyer, she didn't chase easy wins or high-profile cases that padded resumes. She went where the fights were raw, defending people written off by society, standing with communities most politicians only visited when the cameras rolled in. Every case was personal. Every argument was a chance to push back against a system that too often told her clients, "You don't matter." And yet, even in the courtroom, the dismissals followed her. Colleagues doubted her sharpness. Judges underestimated her resolve. Opponents tried to rattle her with arrogance. But every time she steadied herself. She didn't match insult with insult. She didn't shout louder. She relied on preparation, mountains of it. Facts layered like bricks, logic woven into iron. It was her calm precision that made opponents stumble. That fighting spirit carried her into public service. When she stepped into politics, the skepticism roared louder than ever. Pundits wrote her off as too fiery, rivals dismissed her as unseasoned, and some allies even suggested she wait her turn. But Jasmine Crockett had never waited her turn. She carved it. Her roots in community service gave her armor. She wasn't in Washington to climb ladders. She was there to build bridges for people who had been locked out for too long. Every time she was underestimated, it fueled her. Every time she was dismissed, it sharpened her edge. She embraced the underdog role, not as a burden, but as proof that she was fighting battles others were too afraid to take on. And behind the toughness, there was resilience carved by years of being told no. She remembered the late nights studying when exhaustion whispered that she couldn't make it. She remembered the smirks of those who assumed she'd fail before she began. She remembered walking into rooms where she was the only woman of color, the only voice expected to stay silent. And she remembered choosing again and again not to stay silent. This resilience became her brand of leadership. Unyielding, unapologetic, but always rooted in dignity. To the untrained eye, it looked effortless when she dismantled arrogance with calm logic. But the truth, it was decades of practice. Years of learning how to stand taller when others tried to shrink her. By the time Jasmine Crockett entered the halls of Congress, she was not just another freshman representative. She was a fighter trained by struggle, steeled by dismissal, and sharpened by every underestimated moment of her life. And yet, her brilliance wasn't just in her sharpness. It was in her empathy. She carried her community into every chamber she walked into. She remembered the neighbors, the clients, the families whose stories built her mission. That empathy kept her grounded while others drowned in arrogance. It reminded her who she was really fighting for, and why she could never afford to falter. Critics thought she was unprepared. They thought she'd crack under the pressure of Washington's spotlight. But what they didn't know was that she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every dismissal had been a rehearsal. Every doubt had been fuel. Every courtroom battle, every community fight, every whispered "wait your turn," had trained her for the exact moment when composure would matter more than chaos. So when the spotlight fell on her, Crockett was ready. The chamber was thick with tension, every word carrying the weight of history. The atmosphere was less like a polite legal hearing and more like an arena, where each side sharpened its questions into weapons. And there, at the center of it all, stood Jasmine Crockett. Her opponents circled with the kind of tone Washington had perfected. Condescending, smug, dismissive. They leaned back in their chairs, eyes narrowed, voices dripping with the implication that she was out of her depth. The questions weren't designed to uncover truth. They were designed to corner her, to rattle her composure, to paint her brilliance as nothing more than bravado. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't meet arrogance with anger. Instead, she leaned forward ever so slightly, hands folded neatly. Her expression calm yet charged with intent. When her turn came to speak, her voice didn't rise, it steadied. Her cadence was deliberate, every word measured, every pause intentional. She understood the rhythm of power. In a room desperate for spectacle, dignity was its own form of defiance. The crowd noticed. Spectators leaned in, whispers rippling across the chamber as she parried each jab with precision. A dismissive smirk from across the table turned stiff when she countered with evidence too clear to ignore. One opponent tried to cut her off, only for her to wait, silent, poised, until the interruption collapsed under its own weight. Then, with a cool, razor-sharp reply, she reclaimed the floor. Her body language spoke louder than the words themselves. Where her rivals gestured wildly, raising their voices in mock authority, she remained still, unshaken. The stillness made her unbreakable. Her calm was not passivity. It was power condensed. Each time she answered, her voice carried not just her argument but the weight of everyone who had once been dismissed in similar tones. Some in the audience exchanged glances. Journalists scribbled faster in their notepads. Even the murmurs from the back benches shifted, from amusement to intrigue, from doubt to reluctant respect. The dynamic in the room was changing, slowly but unmistakably. Still, her opponents pressed harder. They thought if they piled on enough, layer after layer of doubt, insinuation, arrogance, she would eventually falter. One leaned forward, pointing aggressively, as if volume could replace reason. Another rolled their eyes, muttering under their breath for the microphones to catch. The tactics were clear. Humiliate her, overwhelm her, make her lose her cool. But Crockett was immovable. Each time she returned to the facts. She dismantled hollow rhetoric with the elegance of a surgeon making a precise incision. Her responses didn't just answer the questions. They revealed the emptiness of the questions themselves. The energy in the chamber shifted again. It was subtle at first. A pause before the next attack, a hesitation in a rival's tone, as though even they realized their arrogance was beginning to backfire. And then it was undeniable. She wasn't the one on trial here. They were. Her composure wasn't just a defense, it was offense. Every calm reply illuminated the arrogance of her opponents. Every poised gesture amplified the contrast between dignity and dismissal. The longer she spoke, the more the chamber leaned toward her side. The once dismissive smirks had turned into clenched jaws. And through it all, Crockett's eyes never wavered. She looked directly at her challengers, never intimidated, never evasive. She radiated the quiet certainty of someone who knew she belonged, who had fought too long and too hard to let arrogance define the moment. By now, the murmurs in the room had grown louder. It wasn't just intrigue anymore, it was awe. Even those who had walked in doubting her found themselves pulled into the gravity of her presence. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing every flicker of her expression, every word sharpened by composure. The tension was at its peak. Every viewer at home, every spectator in the chamber, leaned forward as if the next words might break the dam. Her opponents were running out of tricks, their desperation palpable. And Jasmine Crockett, calm and unshaken, was proving, before their very eyes, that brilliance doesn't need to shout to be undeniable. And then, just as the pressure hit its peak, Justice Breyer spoke. It happened in an instant, yet the weight of it seemed to slow time. The chamber, thick with the echoes of condescension, suddenly fell into a silence so sharp you could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Justice Stephen Breyer, the seasoned voice of wisdom, leaned forward. His eyes, keen, calculating, and unburdened by the arrogance that had colored so many of the exchanges, fixed directly on Jasmine Crockett. And then, with the calm gravity only a Supreme Court justice could wield, he spoke words no one expected. "I must say," he began, his tone deliberate, cutting through the tension like a blade through glass, "what Congresswoman Crockett has demonstrated here today is brilliance, clarity and strength that this chamber would do well to respect." The sound landed like thunder. For a heartbeat there was nothing. No scribbling pens. No whispers. No shifting papers. Just silence, heavy and electric. The very critics who had leaned forward to interrupt her now froze in their chairs, eyes widening as though they'd misheard. And then came the collective reaction. The audible gasp from the gallery, the stifled cough from one corner, the sharp glance between two rivals who had, moments before, mocked her composure. The cameras caught it all. A wide shot of the chamber, stunned faces illuminated in the harsh overhead lights, each one reflecting the same disbelief. Breyer's words didn't just praise her. They indicted her opponents. His declaration reframed the entire exchange. What they had tried to paint as arrogance in her was now revealed, in front of the nation, as brilliance. The imbalance was undeniable. The power dynamic had shifted. Crockett didn't leap to gloat, didn't smirk or jab back. Instead, she absorbed the moment with a stillness that made the silence last even longer. She allowed the words to breathe, to ripple across the chamber like shockwaves. And then, slowly, with the measured grace that had carried her through every trial of her journey, she responded. "Justice Breyer," she said, her voice calm yet charged with emotion, "I appreciate your words. But more than respect for me, I hope what we can all respect is the truth. Because that is all I've been fighting to bring forward." The effect was staggering. She didn't center herself, she centered the principle. By doing so, she turned the moment into something larger than her critics, even larger than the clash unfolding in that room. It wasn't just a victory for Jasmine Crockett. It was a victory for dignity, for clarity, for the very idea that brilliance can rise above noise. The audience erupted, not in cheers for the decorum of the chamber held, but in energy, in murmurs swelling like a tide. Some leaned back in awe, others tried to conceal their embarrassment. A few, caught by the cameras, looked as though they had swallowed their own mockery. One rival cleared his throat, fumbling with papers, pretending to review notes that no longer mattered. Another shook her head, forcing a faint smile as if to disguise the sting of being publicly undone. But there was no disguising it. Every camera angle, every glance, every nervous shift told the same story. They had been silenced not by volume, not by anger, but by a recognition of brilliance from the highest voice in the room. Breyer himself sat back, his words hanging in the air like a verdict. And the brilliance of his move was not just in what he said, but in what he left unsaid. He hadn't scolded her critics, hadn't descended into partisanship. He had simply spoken truth. And in doing so, he had rendered their condescension irrelevant. The cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face, capturing every flicker of her reaction. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence in her eyes told the story. Vindication. Not just for herself, but for every moment she'd been underestimated, doubted, or dismissed. This was the answer to all of it. For the progressive, immigrant-friendly, identity pride-driven audience watching from living rooms, phones, and laptops across the country, it was more than a political exchange. It was cinematic. The underdog, mocked and doubted, had stood tall, and then, in the crucial moment, was lifted higher still by the very figure her rivals could not dismiss. It was vindication as spectacle. It was justice, not in a ruling but in recognition. The chamber buzzed with the aftermath. Journalists scribbled furiously, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Staffers exchanged hushed words, already calculating the headlines. And in living rooms nationwide, people were leaning closer to their screens, rewinding the clip, sharing it before the moment had even ended. Crockett, meanwhile, continued with her composure intact. She didn't stretch the moment. She didn't need to. Instead, she transitioned seamlessly back into her argument, as if to prove that her brilliance wasn't a performance but a constant. The applause would come later, outside these walls. In here, she chose to stay grounded, to keep fighting. That restraint, that discipline made the mic drop all the more powerful. The cinematic beats lingered. The camera cutting to her rivals' faces, pale with embarrassment. The slow pan across the gallery, eyes wide with awe. The close-up on Breyer, calm as a judge who had just rewritten the narrative. And then back to Crockett, steady, unshaken. Her presence magnified tenfold by the recognition she'd just received. This was not just a debate anymore. It was a story of power flipping on its head, of dignity silencing arrogance, of truth piercing through noise. Her opponents, once so sure they could drown her out, now sat mute. The same microphones they had weaponized now caught only their silence. The same chamber they had thought was their stage had turned into the scene of their undoing. And the same audience they had counted on to dismiss her was now captivated by her resilience. The mic drop wasn't in her words alone. It was in the collective recognition that brilliance had won. And for all their efforts to diminish her, the moment would forever be remembered not by their dismissive smirks, but by Breyer's respect and Crockett's unshaken dignity. The cameras caught her final look before the segment ended. Steady, composed, and quietly triumphant. It was a look that said everything without a single extra word. I belong here. I always have. And just like that, the scene closed. Not with gavel strikes or raised voices, but with a silence so powerful it echoed louder than any applause. But the true shockwaves weren't inside the chamber. They came after. The chamber may have quieted, but outside those walls, the moment exploded like a thunderclap. Within minutes of Justice Breyer's words and Jasmine Crockett's poised reply, social media lit up in a frenzy that no spin doctor, press secretary, or political consultant could have orchestrated. It was raw, organic, and unstoppable. The first clips came from journalists in the gallery. Grainy cell phone footage posted on X, formerly Twitter, spread like wildfire, the caption reading simply, "Justice Breyer just praised Representative Jasmine Crockett's brilliance on live camera. You have to see this." It was only a 30-second clip, but by the time official news outlets uploaded the full exchange, the internet was already ablaze. Hashtags shot up the trending charts. Hashtag Crockett Brilliance, hashtag Respect Jasmine, and most cutting of all, hashtag Mic Drop Breyer. TikTok users looped the clip with dramatic music, splicing in slow-motion zooms of rivals' stunned faces. Memes flooded Instagram. One showed Crockett with a crown photoshopped over her head, captioned, "When they try to dismiss you, but SCOTUS says otherwise." Another depicted her opponents as chess pawns toppled by a queen. Within hours, millions had watched the moment. By the end of the day, the combined views across platforms passed 50 million. Commentators from every corner of the spectrum weighed in. Some praised Breyer's candor, calling it a masterclass in statesmanship, while others marveled at Crockett's restraint, noting how she didn't overplay the moment. "She let respect speak for itself," wrote one political journalist, and in doing so, elevated the entire conversation. Her rivals, however, didn't fare as well. Clips of their fumbling reactions became instant fodder for ridicule. TikTok lip-sync creators mimicked their awkward faces. Twitter threads mocked their shuffling papers and tight smiles. One viral post compared their silence after Breyer's praise to kids caught lying in front of the teacher. The ridicule stung worse than any official critique, because it came from ordinary people, amplified by millions of laughing emojis. Soon celebrities chimed in. A-list actors retweeted the clip with captions like, "This is how you handle the haters." Singers dropped fire emojis under Crockett's official post. Activists praised the moment as a turning point, a reminder that integrity could shine even in hostile arenas. Prominent journalists debated its long-term impact, noting how rare it was for a Supreme Court justice to publicly call out brilliance in the middle of such a heated exchange. Cable news seized the story too. By evening, it dominated primetime coverage. Panels dissected every frame of Crockett's reaction, every word of Breyer's statement, every embarrassed twitch from her opponents. The visuals replayed on loop, transforming a single exchange into a political landmark. Podcasts and late-night comedians joined in. One late-night host quipped, "Breyer just did what no debate moderator ever could. Shut the noise down with respect." The audience roared. Another joked, "Some people dropped the mic, Breyer dropped the gavel." The ripple effect spread into the political world as well. Allies of Crockett seized the moment to showcase her as a rising star, an example of composure and clarity under fire. Her detractors, meanwhile, scrambled to change the subject, issuing dry statements that seemed even weaker compared to the vitality of the viral moment. One rival attempted to clarify his comments in a morning interview, but the host cut him short. "Congressman, with all due respect, you got shut down by Justice Breyer. People saw it. No need to spin it." Behind the scenes, staffers and strategists recognized the shift. Overnight, Crockett's name recognition soared. Donations to her campaign spiked, with small-dollar contributions flooding in from first-time donors across the country. Emails poured into her office, thousands of them, thanking her for representing dignity, thanking her for standing tall, thanking her for showing what brilliance looks like when tested. Even high school and college students joined the wave. Debate teams replayed the clip in classrooms. Professors cited it as a case study in rhetorical composure. On TikTok, young women used the audio clip of Breyer's praise as a backdrop for their own videos, captioned, "When they underestimate you, but your brilliance speaks louder." By the second day, the story had transcended politics. It had become a cultural moment. Crockett's name was not just in headlines, it was in songs, in memes, in conversations at dinner tables. People who had never watched a congressional debate in their lives suddenly knew her face, her voice, her composure. For her opponents, the humiliation lingered. Reporters followed them in the halls, asking for reactions. Each awkward dodge only fueled more viral clips. What they thought would be a moment to expose her had become the moment that exposed them. And in the background, Justice Breyer remained silent after his remark. He didn't give interviews, didn't issue clarifications. He didn't need to. His words had already echoed across the nation, replayed millions of times. They carried more weight for their simplicity. His silence only deepened their authority. The aftermath was clear. Crockett had not just survived the clash, she had emerged as its undeniable victor. The internet crowned her, the media amplified her, and her rivals were left grappling with the fallout. Yet beyond the viral buzz, there was a deeper meaning. In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett did something remarkable. She didn't gloat, she didn't rub her victory in the faces of her opponents, and she didn't reduce the moment to a single viral soundbite. Instead, she reframed it. For her, what had happened wasn't just about winning an exchange in a hearing room or silencing critics in dramatic fashion. It was about something deeper, proving that dignity and brilliance can prevail over arrogance and dismissiveness. In her first public statement after the exchange, Crockett chose her words carefully. She thanked Justice Breyer for his kindness, but she redirected the spotlight. "What matters most," she said, "isn't the praise of a justice. It's whether we uphold the values of respect, truth, and accountability in public service." That humility struck a chord. At a time when political life often feels like a battlefield of insults, Crockett had demonstrated another way forward, meeting disdain not with fire, but with clarity and composure. The lesson was not just for her rivals. It was for America, for a country weary of endless shouting matches. Her moment of restraint and her refusal to bow to belittlement felt like a breath of fresh air. She had reminded the nation that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly with confidence, and lets truth do the work. Commentators reflected on the broader implications. One op-ed declared, "This wasn't about who scored points in a hearing. It was about a reminder of what leadership should look like. Steady, respectful, unshakable." Another wrote, "Crockett showed that the most powerful rebuttal isn't mockery or rage. It's brilliance rooted in preparation, delivered with grace." In reframing the narrative, Crockett connected her personal triumph to universal values. Her story became less about her versus them, and more about what happens when intellect and respect are allowed to rise above arrogance. It was a moral demonstration that no system, no sneer, no dismissive gesture can ultimately overshadow preparation, resilience, and authenticity. This is what resonated far beyond Washington. Teachers played the clip in classrooms to show students how to handle pressure with grace. Faith leaders referenced the moment in sermons, emphasizing the biblical idea that humility can humble the proud. Parents shared it with their daughters and sons, saying, "See? This is what it looks like to be underestimated," and to prove them wrong with dignity. The crescendo of the moment was not in Breyer's words alone, but in what they symbolized. They revealed a truth often forgotten, that brilliance can't be buried forever, and respect has the power to cut through even the loudest noise. Crockett hadn't just won a clash, she'd restored a sense of possibility. Her lesson is timeless. In an age where division feels constant and arrogance often drowns out humility, Jasmine Crockett demonstrated a simple but powerful truth. Respect and intellect are not outdated, they are undefeated. And that is why her moment carried such weight. It reminded people that America's strength has never been built on who can shout the loudest, but on who can stand tallest when the pressure mounts. The moral of her story isn't confined to politics. It is for every workplace, every classroom, every kitchen table where someone feels overlooked or underestimated. It's the reassurance that brilliance, coupled with composure, can outlast mockery. That dignity is not weakness but power. That the truest form of leadership isn't found in arrogance, but in the ability to rise above it. And so, what began as a confrontation in a crowded chamber became something larger. A mirror held up to a nation. Crockett's brilliance, acknowledged in that instant, was less about her and more about the reminder she offered, that leadership at its best reflects resilience, intellect, and respect. And that's why this wasn't just a clash. It was a reminder of what leadership truly looks like. And so we return to the moment that started it all. Justice Stephen Breyer's words of respect for Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't just about one justice recognizing one Congresswoman. It was bigger than that. It was about brilliance itself being honored in a space where it is too often dismissed, about dignity cutting through the noise of arrogance, and about truth finding its voice in the midst of division. The title of this story, Breyer Respecting Crockett's Brilliance, is more than a headline. It's a symbol of what happens when preparation, composure, and intellect shine so brightly that even the most powerful figures must stop and acknowledge it. Crockett's reaction wasn't just a personal victory. It was a reminder to all of us that respect can still win the day. And here's the truth. Moments like this matter. They remind us that in a time of endless shouting, what truly resonates isn't who can dominate the loudest, but who can stand firm with clarity, respect, and purpose. Crockett embodied that truth, and Breyer's words sealed it. So now I turn it over to you. If you believe in dignity over division, if you believe that respect and brilliance should never be silenced, then be part of this movement. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with others, and add your voice to the call for leadership that uplifts instead of tears down. Because in the end, this story isn't just about what happened in that chamber. It's about what we do with it. Let's make sure voices like Jasmine Crockett's aren't just heard, they're amplified. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe. Stand for brilliance. Stand for respect. Stand for dignity.